Good morning, everybody, and welcome. My name is Kit Jones, Application Specialist here at Roland DGA. Today we're going to be talking about combining different technologies, all mixed up. I'm often asked at trade shows and just dealing with end users, what's the next big thing? What should I be looking forward to or towards in my business? And I think ultimately the answer to that is you. You are the next big thing. Your company is the next big thing. A lot of the equipment that you have now, maybe you're not fully utilizing it together and combining it. For instance, we're going to talk about UV and dye sublimation combinations and engraving and dye sub and UV. And these are the types of things that are going to make for a unique and special product that is basically going to be your next big thing. Now I hope this webinar is going to inspire you. We're going to go through and do some walkthroughs on how we actually created these pieces and the process, but it's going to be a brief overview because ultimately I don't really have the time to cover so many different techniques or technologies. So, and again, we will, if when we're going through the walkthrough on this, if you want that information, we're going to send out some emails, so don't worry about that. You'll don't have to write it all down. We'll get that information to you. So how do you define your company now? I want to go through our agenda for today and just kind of go through what we're going to talk about. Get outside the box. We're going to define the box first of all because they always say get outside the box. Well, what is that box? And then we're going to talk about getting outside of it. We're going to do Mixed Technology 101. So we're going to talk about the different technologies that at Roland we utilize and that we'd like for you to utilize to create and to produce your products. We're going to talk about profitable ways to combine those different technologies and some of the different applications that you can actually create and do to make decent money at. So, and that ultimately is the bottom line. You're in this to be profitable, and hopefully through this webinar you can just again be inspired and get some techniques that might point you in the right direction on that. We're going to go through a couple different combinations, and I'm going to again walk you through some of those processes. We've got the dye sublimation, engraving, and UV printing, UV and engraved products, and then Eco-solvent roll printers and UV, which a lot of people don't necessarily utilize. They've got a UV printer, they've got an Eco-solvent printer, and combining those can create a very unique look. Especially when you have that gloss, you can add watermarks and things of that nature. So let's talk about the box. What is the box, first of all? Well, I believe that the box is your bread and butter. It's your banners that you're working on now. It's your posters, your displays, your signs, trade show booths. And not to knock the box because that's what's keeping your business floating. And properly sold, you can make great money doing that. I'm sure you've been doing that for years. And I ultimately think that getting outside of the box just means thinking a little bit more creativity-wise. Some clients obviously if they need a birthday banner to hang on the garage, getting outside the box doesn't really make sense. Although in the design it does. So you can design something spectacular, and a lot of times in our day-to-day operations and our day-to-day functions, we don't get outside that box even in the design aspect, let alone the application. We just put happy birthday Billy, a birthday cake, and it's blue. So getting outside the box and within your day-to-day routine, not only combining the technologies, but also in your designing. So there's, a couple ways to get outside of that box, and maybe you already do a little bit. But each client deserves a little bit of, design and such. Now, getting outside of the box, what is that? it's creating things that are unique, not norm. You know, ultimately this picture here, I guess this picture here, it shows the box and it shows you. And all the other goldfish more or less represent all the other companies in your area that do the same thing. So how do you define yourself and differentiate your company from all the other companies in your area? Well, you've got to create unique pieces. You've got to put craftsmanship into every project, whether it's a banner or whether it's a wall wrap or a full interior graphic setup for, you know, a Starbucks or a hotel chain. So ultimately, you know, I like to take, you know, fine artists as an example. I had the unique experience a couple weeks back to work on Imaginarium with Jay Roberts, the product manager for UV, and he put this together where he had, you know, 4 or 5 artists from all over the country come, and the combinations of it really did inspire me, and, you know, partially for this webinar, because they were combining techniques of, you know, oil painting and watercolor with UV printers and engravers and just mixing it all up and really helped define this webinar. So thank you, Jay, and thank you to those artists. And for you, I want you to kind of take a page out of that book when you create things. You know, not always do projects allow cost-wise, and they're not always practical to get outside the box, but add a little extra something to it. You know, separate yourself from what the guy down the street would do, and even if it, you know, the profit's a little less, that's not a bad thing, because ultimately when word gets out that you're creating things that are unique and special, you know, the guy with his daughter who's getting married, and you go above and beyond, and, you know, not only is he excited and thanking you, and, you know, you make decent money on it, but word spreads. He tells his friends, those friends work for large companies, they come see you, and it's just a win-win all the way around. All right, so first of all, I'd like to show you a couple things. I hope I defined getting out of the box for you. I believe I have, and if not, then we'll go ahead and define what that means during the process of this webinar. A lot of times I'm asked about UV inks and metallics, so I just wanted to show you something real quick and kind of get into, back to the whole fine art thing. Today we're talking mixed technologies, but there's also mixed media. A lot of times people ask me about metallic inks with the UV. Now, metallic inks are not available on our UV machines. However, by replacing a metallic substrate, because UV printers print on top of the surface, you can get what appears to be a metallic print. Now, this is just basically a metallic silver. And this works great with the UV machines. Now, here's a foiled gold piece. And as you can see, pretty unique, pretty special looking. And you know, that, if you printed this on a white piece of vinyl, it's not really going to have the same effect. You know, and you're only going to get a certain amount of dollars for it. Now, this piece of foiled paper actually is probably as expensive as your vinyl that you would print on. Now, there are a lot of solvent-based medias that you can buy that actually have the same look. You've got brushed metals, you've got all kinds of different things that are printable vinyls. So I encourage you to kind of look for you know, some of those as far as mixing up the media. And again, this is just to show a sample of what you can do by mixing media rather than the technology. And I just wanted to answer some questions for some people that have asked me that. So, all right, so Mixed Technology 101. What does that mean? Well, at Roland, we're pretty diverse here. We've got a slew of different products that help you be diverse in your business practice and what you can create. First, we've got the rotary engravers. This is an EGX up there. It's 600. This is what I used to do my engraving for my projects. It will do routering, so you can actually cut through pieces. It'll engrave. It'll do some basic digital printing or digital cutting. So Yeah, we do have some webinars on this. It's a pretty spectacular machine. I've been working with it for a while now, and I just, I love it. I wish I had one at my house. I would never sleep. I would just work on it all day long. Kidding. But I would definitely utilize that in my day-to-day routines if I were in business for myself. It's a great machine. Next, we have our UV printers. If you look over to the right there, you're going to see the FT, which is our flatbed printer. It's the LEJ 640 FT, and it's a beast. That thing is a production machine. It's got a 6-inch throat, so you can put anything 6 inches or lower in it and print from 5 feet up to 8 feet. So you can print an awful lot of products. I don't know if you can see real well there, but there's a bunch of lunch pails, I believe, on top of that. Now, that was also Product of the Year for SGIA last year, so won a little award. Congratulations to the FT. It's a great machine, and if you're looking for a machine to do some heavy production, that would definitely be it. Below that is the LEF 300, or actually I believe that's a 200. It's a 20-inch printer, and it's got about a 4-inch throat. It can also do roto printing and things of this nature. A great little machine. Do a lot of heavy production with that as well. Now the FT and the LEF both have gloss and white ink, so you can print on black substrates, different colors. The gloss is great for layering effects, covering up and protecting your UV print. We're going to get into some of those, useful things that you can do with those inks here in a little bit. Next is dye sublimation. Now, dye sublimation is kind of emerging right now. It's it's been around for a while, but ultimately it is kind of making its way into the marketplace more and more on a higher level. I went into a California pizza kitchen the other day and looked around, and all of their interior graphics are done on metal, and they're all dye sublimated. It was really awesome to see, and I encourage you, if you haven't really looked into dye sub and you think, oh, it's just too much for me, it really isn't. I mean, there's a lot of post-processing. Obviously, the sublimation, if you're getting into textiles, there's sewing and things like that. But for the hardscapes, for signage, display art, fine art, it's amazing. I mean, the things that you can come up with, the color gamuts and the look is just, it's amazing. So anyways, look into dye sub. Now today we're going to be looking, we've got the RT 640 that we've used for our dye sublimation. Now it also it has fluorescent ink. So I don't have any samples of the fluorescent, and that's probably another webinar. I think we actually just did one about the dye sublimation and the fluorescent ink. So we'll, if you want to look at our archives, you can always go back to Roland DGA and look under webinars, webinar archives, and we've got just a library of different webinars done on just about everything. Yeah, take a look. So if you're interested in that, there's all kinds of good information there. Impact printers. I don't have a picture of an impact printer here, but they're great for printing on, say, stainless steel, metals, things of this nature. They obviously, it's an impact print, so it's single color, and they use dithering and dots and cross-hatching to create special looks and feels. So have a look at that. And we're not going to do much in the impact printing, so we'll talk about that later. But that is a technology that I want you to try to utilize. And then also eco-solvent printers, which are printer cutter lines. Here I show the SG, and I believe that's a 540 there. And then we've got a 300, which is 30-inch. So profitable ways to combine different technologies. Let's talk about that. That's what you're probably here for, really. If you look off to the right there, we've got some great displays, backlit. Those are actually those are UV printed, reverse print, and then they actually have some engraving. You really can't see there too much, but these are just some samples of things that you can create. Now let's go ahead and get right into it because we're getting short on time already. So first sample I want to show and walk through would be our dye sublimation, engraving, and UV print. So step one, you're going to do your dye sublimation. You're going to save your file, obviously, as a PDF. You're going to import that into Eco-solvent and print to paper. Now with dye sub, it's always going to be mirrored because it's a reverse print. So when it goes onto the image, it's going to be non-reverse. It's going to be the way that you actually want it. So you're going to sublimate that into your substrate. Now you do that through heat. You can do that through a clam press, heat press, and you know there's a whole process there, but it's not really that difficult. So don't be afraid of dye sublimation. It looks, you know, just because it's amazing, it looks a lot tougher than it really is, but it is an art form. Then next we're going to engrave it. Now the reason I don't print my UV ink next is because in the engraving process there could be a chance that you know, you may damage your piece. So by it scratching or the piece moving. So make sure your base is nice and tight on there. Make sure that your lift on your blade is good, so that or your diamond blade, so that when it drags over to the next letter, it doesn't actually scrape your material. Once we get our engraving done, it's now time for the UV printing. I did this print on a LEF 300. And basically, because it had the dye sublimation, we needed to do a white base on this so that you didn't see the background coming through the surfboard and the bike, which I will show you here shortly. So you're going to want to do a white base first, and then to add texture and layering and to add some depth to this, I put 7 layers of gloss, which gave it about a 64th of a lift. And then after I was done with my gloss, I then printed the CMYK over the top of that. And the reason I did the CMYK over the top and not the gloss on top of the CMYK is to get a matte look, to get something that looks a little bit more realistic. So now this is that finished piece. So as you can see here, we've done our engraving, which actually is kind of a unique look. I don't know that you can really see that, but this sign would probably be outdoors, and the sunlight would be hitting this and it would be sparkling. I used kind of a different fill pattern in there to engrave it. So it definitely in this sunlight is going to be sparkling and attracting attention, which is what we really want, right? We want people to notice and see our sign. So that's how we get business. Now you see our UV print down here. You can't really see the depth of it, and obviously you can't touch it, but it definitely has a different look. And the reason I went with matte was so that it offset from the gloss, and it's kind of a unique piece. Now, you know, I could print this on a piece of white vinyl and stick it to corrugated plastic, but what do you think you're going to get more money for? The corrugated plastic or this? And ultimately, again, we are looking for profits. So that would be a sample of that. Now I have one more sample here of something, a dye sublimated metal piece. And then what I did is I put what I would call a watermark on there. And I just used the UV gloss for that. You can see the little Roland logo kind of bounce in. And again, it's subtle, but it's, you know, it's kind of unique. You know, a lot of people won't have that ability. So we'll go ahead and jump forward now to UV and engraved. And for the UV and engraved, I basically use the EGX 600 again. As far as my engraving file, I want to set up my file. I can do that in Illustrator, CorelDRAW, what have you. Just save it as a DXF. After that, step 2, we're going to import that into Dr. Engrave, and then we're going to engrave that project. Now, after engraving is complete, that's when you want to do your UV print. Now, obviously, you want to plan, you know, your attack prior to getting into all of this and figure out exactly what you're going to do, figure out if it makes sense for your client, but you know, try to go outside the box on these things. Try to be unique. After you engrave or router, in this case, I have a little panel, control panel that I did as well. We want to do our UV print. Now, generally with plexis, polycarbs, acrylics, glass, we're going to be doing a reverse print with a white backer to kind of protect it and keep it so that it's nice and opaque. And then also, if it's going to be a frontward graphic, like in the case of this one here. Now this is actually an ADA sign. It would be a somebody's maybe door sign or what have you. What we have here is we have an engraved image here with our braille dots, and then we went back through and actually printed UV over the top of that, making a rather unique piece. Now, we could also print our braille dots as well using the gloss and multi-layering. We have a little three-pass process that we can utilize for that. But there you see, that's a kind of a unique piece utilizing UV print and the engraving. Now, you could, sure, you could print a decal and cut it out. So you could also do eco-solvent on this. It'd be a little bit more of a challenge, but you could certainly do that. Secondary, I want to show you this piece. Now what I did here, you can get that in position. We've got a little big on our, can we go out a little bit on that? You know, technical difficulties, people, no problem. So what I have here is I've got a control panel. Now what I did is I did first of all, we routed out these little sections, and this is going to fit on top of it's actually for a video game that's a kind of a drone flying game. And there's little lights that pop through here. I did a reverse print on it and then printed white on the backing of that. And as you can see, that's kind of a unique piece and something a little bit different. Gets you more into, say, a manufacturing situation where you could do, you know, 300, 400, 500 of these. It'd be a pretty profitable job. And then, last but not least, in the engraving and UV print, we have our awards. Now, this is pretty big business. You know, if you don't specialize in this kind of a thing, that's okay. You can, you know, put a couple samples up on your front counter. People walk in. You know, if you are, in fact, a retail type business, you know, they say, what's that? And you show them and you sell it to them. Now, this has much more effect having that print behind it than it would if I just engraved it. You can see kind of how that's a nice big thick piece of acrylic, and then again we print the UV and then cover that with white. So yeah, not bad, right? We'll go ahead and get to our next, which is Eco-solvent and UV printing. Now, this is kind of an area where people think, why would you want to do eco-solvent printing and UV printing? Well, I'll tell you. Printing on, say, our VG, you can print out 3 to 4 times the amount of square footage you can on a UV printer. UV printers are great. They're definitely unique. They're definitely can add value by, you know, with layering and textures, and depending on the substrate, allow you to print on just about anything. But, you know, we got to make sure that that works, and, you know, I'm going to use Jay's butt factor there, which I use often. So anyways, why would you do that? Because, again, you can print out square, if, say, for instance, you're doing a wall mural, and you want to add a watermark or a texture or something to that effect. Something, again, unique, out of the box. Anybody, not anybody, but most people, if they have the eco-solvent printers, can print a wall mural and be able to install that, and that's great. But how do you separate yourself? How are you going to define your company, and how are you going to be unique and get outside the box? Well, you can offer via, if in fact you have a UV printer, adding a texture to that wall graphic or mural, or and I've got some little samples of texture here that I'll show you, and then I'll also show you how I put a watermark on this, which would represent our wall graphic. Now, these are just some quick textures I want to show you, and these are wood. Now, you can't really, you know, see very well, but these actually, you can touch and feel them, and they actually have depth to them. So you could print, you know, an entire wood paneling on a wall mural and utilize the eco-solvent vinyl for your adhesion. And then we have this piece here. Now this you might not be able to see real well because it's pretty subtle, but I think if you look, where's my finger? See right in there, you kind of see that glossy print. It says fine art on it. So, you know, if this were actually in a building and you weren't getting so much light, you can see the art up there. So hopefully you can see that. But ultimately that is utilizing the Eco-solvent speed and the uniqueness of the UV print over the top of that. Now you can use registration marks to register because they're both utilizing the VersaWorks. So there is a workflow doc that I'm putting together on that, so look for that in the near future. All right, thank you. I hope you found this helpful, and thanks for listening and watching, and we'll see you next time.